Hey everyone, God bless you and thanks for tuning in. My reflection today I've entitled Ending Frustration. Does that sound relevant to you? I'll bet you the answer is yes. If I could say that one of the top pastoral challenges during this whole crazy period for the last 18 months of COVID insanity, it's helping the people of God not be frustrated by circumstances that they never anticipated or dreamed could take place. How do we conquer frustration? And what exactly is frustration? Let me have a sip first. I've been teaching through the book of Jonah, this marvelous prophecy that we have now in 4 chapters. And we've been especially taking a deep dive into kind of a psycho-spiritual insight into Jonah's own life. He lived a frustrated life. He was frustrated at God's command to go and preach repentance to the Ninevites, so he just did the exact opposite of repentance. Instead of making a 180-degree turn away from sin in order to orient his life to God, which is what repentance is, he made a 180-degree turn away from God and ran for it. The Lord outsmarted him and put an end to his effort to run away, swallowed him in a fish, and then gave him a second chance. And this time he was a little bit smarter. He did finally what God said, but he didn't do it with a good spirit, and he didn't do it with a spirit of confidence in God. And when in fact, Nineveh did not fall, when this great enemy of Israel, this most violent and awful Assyrian nation, didn't receive the judgment of God that he was hoping to come to pass. And when mercy triumphed over judgment, he was frustrated again. In fact, he was frustrated, the text says, unto death. He actually asked God to take his life. That's how upset he was with the circumstances that had taken place. Oh, this was Jonah's problem. Jonah's problem was this deep-seated unbelief, this deep-seated doubt that produced such horrible frustration. Frustration, dear ones, whenever it appears in us, frustration is evidence of a lack of faith. It shows, in fact, that whatever is happening right in front of our faces, we think shouldn't be happening. And that's exactly what Jonah's problem was. He thought he knew exactly what should happen to this terrible, idolatrous nation that was threatening the people of God, and God didn't do what he thought was appropriate. And he was suspicious that God might pull a fast one on him due to God's extremely gracious, man-loving, covenant-keeping, forgiveness-giving character. And he was terribly, terribly frustrated. St. Paul says in his marvelous epistle to the Romans that all things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. All things. I think that's a very dear verse to most Christians. But do we actually believe it? If we believed it, we would end our frustration. Because frustration is proof positive that we actually do not believe that verse, at least in that moment in our lives that we're so upset about. We become convinced this is what frustration is. We're convinced that what's ever happening right in front of us, or to us, or near us, shouldn't be happening. That somehow it's a mistake. God's universal providence governing all things according to his will. Somehow there must have been some bleep, some temporary suspension of God's good government of our life, and that's why this came into our life. In fact, giving in to that unbelief, thinking that somehow what's happening to us shouldn't be happening, is the ultimate and ancient trick of the evil one. Doubt, unbelief, always starts with the impugning of God's character. There's always first that satanic lie. Did God really say that? Does he really want the best for you? Can you really believe that what is happening in front of your life, even if it's a cross, even if it's painful, even if it hurts your pride, even if it calls forth from you incredible effort that you don't think you can muster because of your sense of weakness? Do you really believe that what's happening in front of you has been carefully arranged by the God of all glory for your salvation? You should, if you're a Christian, because we believe that. We believe that. And frustration comes from us not believing that, from our cessation to remain in faith in the presence of, usually of the presence of a cross. Do we really believe that bearing that cross that has been weaved carefully by Jesus for each one of his disciples for that day, do we really believe that bearing that cross will in fact lead to transfigured glory? We should. We should. But frustration proves that we don't, that often we don't. We end frustration by faith. Our deep spiritual problem is this problem of limited faith and unbelief. And we, like Jonah, have opportunities that God provides us to make progress, to grow, to move ahead. You know, Jonah despised the Assyrians because they were idol worshipers. You know, when Jonah got thrown into the sea at his own request, and he was swallowed by the whale and he was descending to the depths of the earth, he prayed. He finally, in the midst of his misery, after God had broken his will, he finally turned to God and prayed. First time he did in the whole book. And at the end of his prayer, where he finally mentions grace and mercy, finally at the end, he also says that those who worship idols forsake the mercy that is available to them. That was his perspective. Even when he was drowning, he had his eyes on how bad the Assyrians were, these terrible idol worshipers. Well, God had something to tell him, and he has something to tell us. Even if we confess the true faith, if we don't believe it, if we doubt God constantly, if we enshrine as our ultimate commitment belief in our judgment, belief in what we think is right, and therefore we get angry like Jonah, and even to the point of wanting to die. Instead of trusting God with our life, forgive me, dear ones, we're idol worshipers. We idolize our own will above God's. That's what that kind of intense anger and frustration at the vicissitudes that God has arranged in our life bears witness to. Our own unbelief and our own worship of what we think is best, and we have this conflict. You know, the spiritual life is a war. It's a war. It's a war against spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places, certainly, against the devils, for sure, but it's also a war against ourselves. It's a war against our old man that St. Paul calls us to put to death. It's a war against the old us that wasn't a person of faith and didn't have complete confidence in the Lord Christ to govern our lives. But that's not who we are, dear ones. We're believers, right? Faithful, that means people full of faith. We trust God. We trust God. And when you're angry or frustrated, just think of those questions that God repeated over and over to Jonah. When he said to him, "Do you have reason to be angry?" The answer is no. The answer is no. May God strengthen us and in our faith and help us put an end to frustration. God be with you.
Now available at patristicnectar.org.
Patristic Nectar is pleased to offer a new 9-part series entitled The Mother of God in Our Lives. This offering is the fruit of a 3-day conference hosted by Patristic Nectar Publications, a collaboration of many clergy scholars, including the keynote speaker, His Grace, Bishop Irenee of London, Archimandrite Maximus Konstas, Father Kalinik Berger, Father Chad Hatfield, and Father John Parker. The lectures are dedicated to an edifying examination of the great feasts of the Mother of God, as well as additional lectures on particular aspects of the life of the Most Holy Theotokos and her role in the lives of Christian believers.
For these and other available titles, please visit our website at patristicnectar.org. www.ccc.org.